The Atlantic didn't care about billionaire legacies or the quiet dreams of schoolteachers. It only cared about the rhythm of the tide. In the small coastal town of Oakhaven, Maine, that rhythm was the only thing Olivia Carter could count on. At 28, her life was a series of gentle, predictable cadences. The squeak of sneakers on the gymnasium floor during music class, the smell of wood smoke in her small cottage, and the biting chill of the March wind that rattled her window panes. Olivia liked the quiet, or rather, she had convinced herself she did. Stability was a shield she had forged after her parents passed away during her college years, leaving her with a house full of memories, and a heart that preferred safety over the terrifying heights of ambition. Then came the night the silence broke. It started with a car, a sleek midnight blue obsidian beast that looked like a jagged tooth against the soft snowy backdrop of Main Street. It sat idling outside the Rusty Anchor, the town's only upscale bistro. Olivia, wrapping her wool scarf tighter around her neck as she walked home from a late rehearsal, stopped in her tracks. She knew that silhouette, not the car, the man stepping out of it. Daniel Hayes. 20 years is a lifetime in the world of tech, where Daniel had become a titan, a ghost of silicon and gold. But in the memories of a girl who used to climb apple trees, he was just the boy from next door who had shared his headphones and promised he'd see the world. He had grown broader, his movements more deliberate, his face chiseled into a mask of executive coldness that didn't quite reach his eyes. Eyes that were now scanning the horizon as if searching for a version of himself he had left behind. Liv? Quote. The voice was a low vibration that seemed to hum in her bones. He hadn't seen her in 2 decades. Yet he said her name like it was a note he had been humming under his breath the entire time. Daniel, she whispered, her breath hitching in the frozen air. What are you doing here? Quote, I'm here to see you. There was no flourish, no billionaire bravado, just raw, unsettling honesty. An hour later they sat in a secluded booth at the back of the bistro. Daniel didn't touch his wine. He only watched her. I've followed your life, Olivia, he said softly. The teaching awards, the way you stayed to keep the music program alive. You're exactly who I thought you'd be. The only person I know who hasn't been corrupted by the need for more. I like my life, Daniel, she replied quietly. It's enough. I thought mine was enough too, he admitted. Then his voice lowered. 6 months ago the doctors diagnosed me with a condition. If I want a family, the window is closing. Fast. Within a year the chance may be gone forever. Olivia felt a wave of sympathy rise in her chest. I'm so sorry, Daniel, but surely there are clinics. There are people who, quote, I don't want a stranger. The candlelight flickered in his eyes. I've spent 10 years surrounded by people who want something from me. I can't bring a child into this world with someone I don't trust. He took a breath. I want you to have a child with me. Not as a surrogate, as a mother, as my partner in this one thing. The world tilted. You're asking me to have a baby with you, because we played in the dirt 20 years ago? Quote, because you're the only person who ever saw Daniel. Not Hayes Tech. I'm terrified of being the last of my line. Please, just think about it. Her chair scraped across the floor. I can't, Daniel. I have a life here. I have peace. She stepped out into the freezing Maine night. But the silence of the town suddenly felt different. Less like peace, more like a void. And for the first time in years, the rhythm of the tide felt lonely. The silence of Oakhaven, once a comfort, began to feel like a slow-growing bruise. For 3 weeks, Olivia went through the motions, conducting the third-grade choir, grading music theory worksheets, and staring at the empty chair across from her at her small kitchen table. Every time the wind rattled the shingles of her cottage, she heard Daniel's voice. "I'm terrified of leaving nothing behind but code and glass." The decision didn't come in a flash of lightning. It came in the quiet realization that she was 30, and her greatest fear wasn't chaos. It was the possibility that her life had already reached its final movement without ever truly beginning. She called him on a Tuesday. By Thursday, a black town car was waiting at her curb. "I have conditions, Daniel," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her knees as she stepped into his world. A sprawling, glass-walled penthouse overlooking the jagged skyline of Manhattan. The air up here felt thinner, scrubbed clean by expensive filtration systems and the scent of white lilies. Daniel stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights reflecting in his dark eyes. He looked exhausted, the sharp lines of his designer suit failing to hide the tension in his shoulders. "Anything," he said. "We are equals," Olivia stated, her main pragmatism anchoring her. "I am not an employee. I am not a secret. We do this as friends, as partners, or not at all. And if this works, we raise this child together. No boarding schools, no phalanx of nannies. You have to be present." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Daniel replied. Moving toward her, he stopped just outside her personal space, the heat radiating from him a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of the apartment. "Thank you, Liv, for trusting me." The transition was a dizzying blur. Olivia was thrust into a life of medical consultations with world-renowned specialists, and the suffocating scrutiny of Manhattan high society. Daniel tried to shield her, but the whispers followed them. In the waiting rooms of fertility clinics, Olivia felt like a specimen under a microscope. She was the mystery woman from the coast, the quiet teacher who had somehow captured the attention of the world's most eligible bachelor. "They think I'm a gold digger," she whispered one night, sitting on the edge of a velvet sofa in the penthouse library. She was surrounded by first edition books she was too nervous to touch. Daniel sat on the floor near her feet, loosening his silk tie. The gesture was so reminiscent of the boy who used to kick off his grass-stained sneakers that Olivia felt a pang of nostalgia. "Let them think what they want. They don't know that I'm the one who begged you to be here. They don't know that you're the only thing in this city that feels real to me." As the weeks turned into months, the clinical nature of their agreement began to fray at the edges. They spent their evenings not discussing legal contracts or medical schedules, but talking until the sun began to bleed over the East River. Olivia taught Daniel how to listen to the nuances of a piano concerto. Daniel showed her the constellations hidden behind the city's light pollution. They shared meals in the kitchen at 2 a.m., cereal eaten out of plastic bowls because the fine china felt too heavy for their late night confessions. She learned that his drive for success was fueled by a desperate need to provide the security his own father never could. He learned that her love for music was a way of keeping her mother's voice alive. "I missed you, Liv," he said one evening, his hand brushing hers as they reached for the same carafe of water. "All those years in Silicon Valley, I kept thinking I'd find someone who looked at me the way you did when we were 10. Someone who didn't care about the valuation of my company. I just saw Daniel, she whispered, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But the emotional intimacy only made the clinical failures harder to bear. The first procedure failed, then the second. Each negative result felt like a morning. Olivia saw the light dim in Daniel's eyes with every phone call from the doctor. The pressure from his board of directors was mounting. Rumors of his distraction were driving stock prices down. The agreement was becoming a weight. Olivia began to wonder if she was just another project Daniel Hayes couldn't complete. Another dream that would eventually turn to code and glass. She felt the walls of the penthouse closing in, a gilded cage where she was losing herself in the shadows of his legacy. Maybe I'm not the right person for this, she said one rainy afternoon. Staring out at the gray city. Maybe I'm just a ghost from your past you're trying to use to fix your future. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. The silence between them was no longer the comfortable quiet of Oakhaven. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of two people terrified that they were failing each other. The heat in New York that July was thick enough to swallow. Tension in the penthouse was at a breaking point after the third failed implantation. Daniel was buried in his office, his voice echoing through the halls as he fought off a hostile takeover attempt. While Olivia felt like a ghost haunting his hallways, the partnership felt more like a business transaction gone wrong. Then, the sky turned the color of a bruised plum. A massive summer storm rolled over Manhattan, lightning dancing between the skyscrapers like jagged nerves. At 9:14 p.m., the world went black. The hum of the air conditioning died. The lights vanished, and the city's constant roar was replaced by the eerie, rhythmic drumming of rain against glass. Olivia fumbled for a candle in the kitchen, her heart racing. In the darkness, the penthouse felt cavernous and terrifying. Liv? Quote. Daniel appeared in the doorway, the glow of his phone illuminating the sharp, hollow planes of his face. He looked wrecked. He had shed his suit jacket, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his hair disheveled. I'm here, she said, her voice small. They sat on the floor of the living room, a single candle flickering between them. The heat was oppressive, making the air feel intimate and heavy. For a long time, neither spoke. The billionaire and the teacher were stripped of their titles by the dark. The board wants me to step down, Daniel said suddenly, his voice thick with a bitterness she'd never heard. They think I've lost my edge. They think this obsession with a family is a sign of weakness. They want me to be a machine. Liv, they've always wanted me to be a machine. You aren't a machine, Daniel, Olivia said, reaching out. This time, she didn't pull back. She took his hand, his skin hot and calloused. You're a man who wants to be loved. Why is that so hard for you to admit? Quote, because if I admit it, then I have to admit how much I've failed you, he choked out, his grip on her hand tightening until it almost hurt. I brought you here, away from your home, away from your peace. I've put you through hell with these doctors. And for what? To satisfy my ego? I see the way you look at me sometimes. Olivia, you're afraid I'm just using you. I am afraid, she confessed, the honesty spilling out of her in the dark. I'm afraid that if this doesn't work, you'll realize I'm just a girl from a small town who doesn't fit in your world. I'm afraid that once you get what you want, there won't be a place for me anymore. You are the only thing that makes this world worth fitting into, Daniel whispered. He moved closer, the candlelight casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I didn't bring you here just because I trusted you, Liv. I brought you here because I've been in love with you since I was 12 years old. And I was too much of a coward to tell you before I became this. The confession hung in the air, more powerful than the storm outside. Olivia felt the invisible wall she'd built around her heart crumble. The agreement, the conditions, the medical procedures. They all fell away. There was only the heat, the rain, and the boy who had grown into a man who was just as lonely as she was. Daniel, she breathed. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. I don't care about the legacy anymore. I don't care about the tech or the money. If we never have a child, if it's just us, that has to be enough. I just want you. In the darkness of a city without power, they stopped being business partners. The kiss was desperate, a release of 20 years of suppressed longing and 3 months of clinical tension. It wasn't a calculated move or a part of a contract. It was two souls finally finding their way back to the rhythm they had started as children. The storm raged outside, but inside the penthouse, the air finally cleared. For the first time since she'd arrived in New York, Olivia didn't feel like a guest or an arrangement. She felt like she was home. 6 weeks later, the world had turned back on, but Olivia's world had changed forever. She stood in the sleek, modern bathroom of the penthouse, staring at a small plastic stick. She had been feeling dizzy, nauseous from the smell of the morning coffee she usually loved. 2 pink lines. But the math didn't add up. They hadn't been back to the clinic since the blackout. The doctors had said the chances were astronomical, nearly impossible. She walked into Daniel's home office, where he was staring at a monitor showing his company's plummeting stock. He looked up, his expression softening instantly when he saw her. Liv? What is it? Are you okay? Quote. She didn't speak. She simply walked over and placed the test on his mahogany desk. Daniel stared at it for a full minute, his face turning pale. But we didn't. The procedure failed. It happened. Daniel, she said, tears blurring her vision. It happened naturally. We didn't need the science. We just needed us. He stood up, his chair crashing backward, and pulled her into his arms, sobbing into her neck. It was the first time she had ever seen the titan of tech cry. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. The bubble of their joy lasted exactly 4 days. It started with a blind item on a popular tech blog, followed by a grainy paparazzi photo of Olivia leaving an obstetrician's office. By Friday, the headline was splashed across every major tabloid. The billionaire's heir. Is Daniel Hayes' small-town friend his newest acquisition? The world was not kind. The internet dissected Olivia's life, digging up photos of her modest Maine cottage and framing her as a calculating opportunist who had used a childhood connection to trap a billionaire. The agreement had leaked, or at least, a distorted version of it. They called it a breeding contract. Olivia sat in the center of the penthouse, the curtains drawn, her phone buzzing incessantly with hateful messages and calls from reporters back in Oakhaven. The peace she had worked so hard to build was being dismantled by a world that didn't believe in love without an invoice. My friends in Oakhaven, they're calling me a gold digger, Daniel, she whispered, her voice trembling. My principal called. They're reviewing my contract for next year because of the scandalous nature of the publicity. I've lost my life. All of it. Daniel was pacing the room, his jaw tight enough to snap. I'll sue them. I'll buy the damn tabloids and burn them down. You can't buy back my reputation. She cried, standing up. This is what I was afraid of. Your world is a swamp, and I'm drowning in it. The crisis reached a fever pitch on Monday morning. Daniel's board of directors called an emergency meeting. The lead investor, a cold man named Marcus Thorne, met Daniel in the glass-walled boardroom. The optics are a disaster. Daniel, Thorne said, sliding a folder across the table. A private arrangement for a child? It looks like human trafficking to the conservative investors and like a midlife crisis to the rest. Your personal life is devaluing the company by billions. You need to issue a statement. Deny the relationship. Say she was a surrogate who broke her NDA. We'll pay her off. She goes back to Maine. And you get back to work. Daniel looked at the folder, then at the men sitting around the table, men he had enriched, men he had called colleagues. He realized he was looking at his legacy. It was cold, sharp, and entirely devoid of life. He thought of Olivia. He thought of the way she hummed when she was making tea. He thought of the tiny heartbeat they had seen on the ultrasound just 2 days ago. A miracle that defied every medical chart in his hand. She isn't a surrogate, Daniel said, his voice dangerously low. Daniel, be reasonable. Quote, and she isn't an acquisition, Daniel interrupted. Standing up, he felt a strange, terrifying lightness spreading through his chest. She is the woman I love, and this child is not a PR complication. It's my life. If you choose this path, the board will vote for your removal. You'll lose the CEO chair. You'll lose the company you built from a garage, Thorne warned. Daniel looked out the window at the sprawling city. He had spent his whole life climbing to the top of this mountain, only to realize the air was too thin to breathe. Then take it, Daniel said. He took his keycard off his lanyard and dropped it on the table. The plastic click sounded like a gavel. I'm done building things that don't love me back. He walked out of the building, ignored the shouting reporters, and drove himself, something he hadn't done in years, back to the penthouse. Olivia was packing a small suitcase, her face streaked with tears. She stopped when she saw him. Daniel? What happened? The news is saying there's a massive sell-off. I quit, he said, walking over to her and taking the suitcase out of her hands. You what? Quote, I told them the truth. Liv, I told them I love you. I told them I'd rather be a father in Maine than a king in New York. He cupped her face in his hands. Let's go home. Not to a penthouse. To Oak Haven. I don't want to be Daniel Hayes, the CEO. I just want to be Daniel, the guy who lives next door to the woman of his dreams. You'd give it all up? She asked, her breath catching. The power? The influence? Quote, it's not all, Liv, he said, kissing her forehead. It's nothing. You and the baby. You're the all. Everything else was just noise. They left that night, leaving the city lights in the rearview mirror. As they crossed the state line into Maine, the air began to smell of salt and pine again. The noise of the world faded, replaced by the steady, rhythmic beat of two hearts finally in sync. Oak Haven was different in the autumn. The vibrant greens of summer had deepened into burnt oranges and golds, and the air carried a crisp, bracing edge that tasted of coming winter. The transition wasn't easy. For the first few months, the town's curiosity was a dull ache. People stared at the grocery store. Whispers followed Olivia to the post office. But Daniel didn't hide. He didn't use his wealth to build a wall around them. Instead, he spent his mornings hammering nails, helping to restore the dilapidated community center. He traded his $5,000 suits for flannel shirts and work boots. He bought coffee for the fishermen and listened to their stories, not as a tech giant, but as a man who wanted to earn his place in their dirt. Slowly, the town's suspicion thawed. They saw the way he looked at Olivia, not as a trophy or an arrangement, but as his North Star. They saw the way Olivia's glow returned, her laughter once again echoing through the hallways of the elementary school, where she had been reinstated after a massive petition from the parents who knew her heart. In late October, they were married in the small seaside church where Olivia had once been a clumsy flower girl. There were no cameras, no investors, and no press releases. The only guests were the people who had known them since they were children. The local librarian, the baker, and a handful of friends who had finally seen the truth of their bond. Olivia wore a simple lace dress that moved like seafoam as she walked down the aisle to the sound of a cello. She looked at Daniel. He was standing at the altar, looking more powerful than he ever had in a boardroom. Because for the first time, he looked whole. "I spent my life trying to build a future I could control," Daniel said during his vows, his voice echoing in the small wooden chapel. "I thought success was a number. I thought a legacy was a name on a building. I was wrong. A legacy is the hand you hold when you're afraid. A legacy is the person who remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. Olivia, you saved me from a life of glass. You gave me a life of music." When winter returned, the cottage was filled with the scent of cinnamon and the warmth of a roaring fire. The condition that had started it all, the autoimmune threat, seemed to have retreated into the background, managed by the peace of their new life and the joy that acted as its own medicine. On a snowy Tuesday in February, their daughter was born. They named her Clara, after Olivia's mother. When the nurse placed the tiny, crying bundle into Daniel's arms, the man who had commanded thousands of employees froze. He looked down at the delicate fingers, the tuft of dark hair, and the eyes that were already searching for his. "She's perfect," Daniel whispered, tears streaming down his face as he sat on the edge of Olivia's hospital bed. "She's as," Olivia said, her voice tired but radiant. They returned to their cottage, where a hand-carved cradle sat in the corner of the bedroom. The world outside Oakhaven continued its frantic pace. The company Daniel built had moved on, its stock stabilizing under new leadership. The tabloids had found new scandals to feast upon. To the rest of the world, Daniel Hayes was a fallen star, a cautionary tale of a man who gave up an empire for a quiet life. But as Daniel sat in a rocking chair by the window, watching the snow fall over the Atlantic with Clara asleep on his chest, he knew he had won. He looked at Olivia, who was playing a soft melody on the piano in the next room, a lullaby she had written for their daughter. He realized that all the power and success he had chased for 20 years had been a search for this exact moment, the quiet, the connection, the simple, profound miracle of a family built not on a contract, but on the courage to be vulnerable. "You okay?" Olivia asked, stepping into the doorway, the golden lamplight framing her. "I'm more than okay," Daniel said. reaching out to take her hand as she moved toward him. I finally have a life that's enough. The rhythm of the tide continued outside, timeless and indifferent, but inside the cottage, there was a new rhythm, a soft, steady heartbeat that promised that the best stories don't end with a happily ever after, but with the quiet, daily choice to love and be loved in return. The teacher and the boy from next door had finally found their way home.